Welcome to the selected group of trees on display at Denver Botanic Gardens. I'm joined by Larry Jackel, the curator of the Bonsai Pavilion here at Denver Botanic Gardens, and Tom Anglewicz, previous president of Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society. Let's begin the narrated walkthrough with a beautiful Ponderosa pine. Larry and Tom, what do we think about this tree and why was it selected?
So Tom, when I see this tree, I think of the story of this tree, what the environment has done. This tree started its life in the Rocky Mountains and it ran into some environmental challenges, got knocked down, twisted, branches died. Then the artist found it and put it in this wonderful little container and accentuated this flow of the tree.
It's a really great, gnarly old tree, and for people who may not know, the term Yamadori that Larry used is in Japanese literally means from the mountain. So this is a collected tree and probably maybe 150 years old. But it is a very gnarly tree. It has really great foliage, a wonderful pot that really complements the shape of the tree. And it also is a tree that belongs to our Artist of the Year this year, Jim Lantis from Wyoming.
We have a beautiful example of a sub-alpine fir, clearly showing a weathered Rocky Mountain region.
So one of the things that the artist has done well with this beautiful Yamadori is the unity of design. The pot is very complementary to the ruggedness and the flow of the tree. The gnarliness of the bark is sort of accentuated by this in here. Nice flow. It's a typical alpine design where it's sort of apically growing at the top. And then the environment has changed the big growing and killed it. And a new sub branches come up and become the new apex on this tree.
Yeah, I think one of the great things about this tree is the fact that one of the things that we strive for in bonsai is to create in miniature the image of a very old tree. And this tree really feels like a very aged tree. The limbs feeling like they've carried snow load for many years. And I agree with you about the pot. The pot is a horse Heinzelreiter pot. And it's really just a beautiful old tree with a lot of character and a lot of gnarliness to it.
Typically, this is a tree that's a high elevation tree.
Right.
You'd see it probably above 10,000 feet. One of the easiest ways to see a tree like this is to go skiing and sit on a chairlift, and as you go up, you see thousands of them like this along the slope as you're getting up to the top of the mountain.
And Larry, I always get questions about these deadwood spires being left on trees. Can you speak to why that's done in bonsai?
The dead wood adds a quality of age that makes them really unique. Sometimes people would think of it as a flaw, but for a Yamadori, that flaw becomes actually an accent that enhances the quality of the tree. So one of the things that's happening in the United States especially, but also around the world, are various other types of species are being used in bonsai. This particular species of succulent is called a Bursera, and the artist that collected this has been working on it for about 7 or 8 years. Styling is a challenge in a traditional bonsai sense, but if you open up your perspective a little bit and just look at the plant and see what you can do to make it a bonsai, then you see this amazing fat trunk and some rootage anchored in the pot as it's leaning over. It tells a nice story of survival and struggle in the environment that this tree was in.
One of the reasons that we selected this tree for the exhibition here is the fact that it is an unusual tree that you don't often see as bonsai. And as Larry mentioned, we have to expand our horizons. I was talking to him earlier about the fact that in Japan, succulents are typically not accepted as bonsai, but we have great opportunity in this country and in other parts of the world to really use succulents in a way that you might not consider. There's one more that we're going to show you that will illustrate that very well. This is a really nice tree.
This is Porticolera afra. It's very often confused with a jade plant, but as you can see, the size It's a different species, and the size of the leaves is much more appropriate for a bonsai style. One of the interesting stories about this particular plant and all of the Porticularia, the artist that does this about 30 years ago decided that he was going to specialize in this species, and he probably has 200 Porticularia, mostly grown from cuttings at home.
Yeah, he does a wonderful job. And my comment earlier about succulents not being considered material for bonsai, I think Lou, the artist here, really belies that fact, because it's such a you can see what a wonderful shape and styling this tree has, and a wonderful trunk too. And this tree was actually in our annual show last year as well, and a lot of people commented on it. It really is a wonderful example, and these trees are very easy to propagate. Actually, my wife propagates them all the time. We have all kinds of little Portulacaria around the house, but this is really an extraordinary example, I think, of that.
This is one of the tiger bark ficus microcarpas. The artist here has done a really wonderful job of giving you the feel of a big tree that would be growing in the tropics. Mm-hmm. This tree takes me to the Tampa Bay area, St. Pete area, walking in some of their parks. You see massive crowns, large trees, and you also see these wonderful aerial roots that are coming down here that make that branch coming out a little bit more supported, a more interesting view to look at in the rooted structure at the bottom here.
Mm-hmm. One of the, we talked about the other artist with the Portulacaria specializing essentially in that species, and this gentleman who owns this tree also tends to specialize in ficus and grows them actually under grow lights throughout the year, except in the summer, I guess, when he puts them outside. And he has a technique for developing these aerial roots, which involves putting the plant inside of a large plastic bag, essentially creating a small greenhouse to encourage the development of those aerial roots. It's an interesting process, but this is a beautiful tree, a beautiful example, I think. Very nice pot too.
Fantastic example, and who'd have thought you're going to be seeing aerial roots on a ficus in the Rocky Mountain region?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get a little closer back to our region. Here we have a fantastic example of a blue spruce. This one actually done by our host here, Larry Jackel. This tree is quite a bit old, as you can see detailed in the old weathered wood on this. Again, a very nice attraction that we can offer in the Rocky Mountain region. Such a beautiful proportion to this tree with the fat trunk and this beautiful, graceful foliage up top. Just really bringing into one tree the weather that this tree has endured throughout the years, combined with the grace that it still provides in its display. Tom, what do you think?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful tree, and Larry should speak to a little bit about the history of it, but it's a tree actually that was in the national exhibition 2 years ago?
Yes.
2 years ago. Every year we have an American national bonsai exhibition that's staged by a gentleman named Bill Hosokawa in Rochester, New York, and this tree was featured there. It's a great honor actually to be accepted into that competition or that exhibition. Okay?
So when I saw this tree first growing in the wild, the thing that got my attention and struck me was this interesting detail and the struggle that was involved in here, and possibility of how that came about. And I know in the area where this grows there's a large elk herd, and I could just visualize 150 years ago an elk coming in here and nibbling on the bottom of this, and the tree responded by persevering and growing around it. And then the design of the tree was easy because the movement just kind of continued on the flow of the tree. So you have a real eye catcher here, and then the trunk line brings you up into the foliage mass, and old trees with domes on the top give you the feeling that they've been there a long time.
One of the things that I should mention, I think, or we should mention, is that a lot of times when we're talking to people that come through the pavilion or in the gardens or in our show about the fact that a tree is 150 or 200 years old, and they say, well, how could it be that old? It's only that small. And the reason, with collected material at least, is that a lot of these trees are growing in confined environments, like a rock crevice, for example, for many, many, many years with relatively small amounts of nourishment and moisture. So that's how they get to be dwarfed like this naturally.
So we've been looking at rugged trees, and now we have a tree that we would say would be very graceful in its flow. Also, if you take a look at the trunk bark is very, very smooth in here. So the flow kind of comes up very gently, like it would be in a parkland setting, maybe on the East Coast. This tree has been in cultivation by the artist for 47 years. So it's been around and developed for quite a long time. And this rugged bottom, it looks like it's been anchored in, it's not going anywhere. But you get this beautiful flow, and this very interesting beech leaf on here is also a nice complement. In another 2 or 3 weeks, the fall color will change, and it will become very dramatic in its look, and yellows and oranges on the foliage.
Starting to happen already.
Yeah, just a little bit of color.
Yeah.
Is starting to change.
Sometimes with deciduous trees, we do exhibitions that are called winter silhouettes. That is when a tree drops its leaves at the end of the growing season, and we can more clearly see the structure of the tree. And that's a very interesting kind of exhibition. Larry and I were both in Japan in February, early February, before the virus hit. And a lot of the deciduous trees that were in that exhibition in Tokyo were denuded of foliage, right, and were winter silhouette trees, and beautiful, beautiful trees. This is a wonderful tree.
Here we have a beautiful white pine brought down by one of our Wyoming artists, Daniel Whitecrack. Clearly a beautiful pine. Hard to get anything nicer than a white pine when it comes to size of needles in relation to the tree.
This is a tree that was actually imported from Japan, and it's called a Miyajima white pine. The white pine is a 5-needle pine, as opposed to a 2-needle pine or 3-needle pine like a Ponderosa, for example. In that sense, it's very similar to one of our native pines, which is a limber pine. They're both 5-needle pines. They both behave the same way, but this tree has a little different color. And the white pine is very, very popular in Japan. You see many, many white pines in bonsai exhibition. This one is a particularly nice one. The movement of the trunk, the base of the trunk, and the nabari, or the surface roots, very nicely done.
Yeah. Tom, I would agree with that. The movement, but also the thing that catches my eye is the ruggedness of the bark here and the color. The light grays are offset by a little bit darker color gray in the pot. And one of the other things I like that the artist has done is we have lots of nice spaces here that delineate masses, and this negative space accentuates these separate foliage masses very well and makes it easier to realize that this could be a bigger tree just like that.
Right, exactly. Having the negative space also allows you to see more of the structure of the tree, so it doesn't just look like a bush. Nice Wonderful. Tree, really nice tree.
Next on our list we have a mountain mahogany, not a common species seen.
Well, the mountain mahogany is a fairly common tree growing as a ground shrub type tree in the Ponderosa forest here in the Rocky Mountains. But its growth habit is such that it is almost impossible to get out of the ground. I believe the artist found this in a nursery somewhere in New Mexico. There are some places there that will grow these. And the thing about it that struck him and strikes me, and it's very common in the mountain mahogany, and why I keep looking at them when I'm hiking, is this rugged, gnarly trunk and the dead wood in here. Plus the leaf structure is very nice. And here's an example of essentially a yamadori where what you get is what you have to work with. So it's sort of an untraditional look, but the artist is again starting to develop some different levels of foliage mass in here that are going to end up being pretty good after another few years of growth here. Tom?
Yeah, we selected this tree partly because it is so unusual. It's not a tree, as Larry mentioned, that you would normally associate with bonsai, and not that easy to find. You see all this moss growing on here. I laugh a little bit because in our climate it is extremely difficult to grow moss, and so I think the artist here really spent some time cultivating this, and probably in a protected environment like a greenhouse or whatever. But if you look at the tree very closely too, you'll see that almost every one of these tiny little branches is wired. And wire is obviously a vehicle that we use for shaping and directing the growth of branches. And you don't see it so clearly on this tree, but if you get close, you can see all the wire on it.
One of the things they say about if bonsai is successful, it's because when a viewer, maybe someone that you don't know, looks at it and comments that they've seen this tree in the wild or in a park somewhere, and this tree takes me to maybe a more cultivated city park where a tree has been there for 150 years. It's got this massive trunk and this huge crown that creates this great shaded area with maybe a little playground for the kids underneath, if it's a real size. But this is the field that you get here. Again, you see some nice texture. The flare of the roots at the bottom are pretty good. Interesting plant, a sumo broom style.
One of the nice things about Chinese elms is the size of their leaf. I have a number of Chinese elms at home, and depending on what kind of cultivar, they will have smaller or larger leaves. But this tree has a really nice proportion of leaves, and probably could use a little bit of pruning. But the trunk, I think, is one of the distinctive things about it, because you don't often see Chinese elms with that kind of girth and strength.
I hope that you all make it to Denver Botanic Gardens to enjoy the rest of the trees on display. And of course, don't forget the online virtual show at rmbonsai.org.